A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, and welcome to the School of Wine. No, this is not an ex animo David Clark ripoff. It is instead our own take on something that came to me during the course of last month when I was running through my WSET3 studies and exam. I still haven't got the results for that exam, and there is more than a touch of nerves to the impending news. But whatever happens, whatever I do manage to get out of it, whether I do scrape through or I do have to rewrite the exam, as many do, I learned an enormous amount. It was slightly humbling to realize just how much I didn't know about wine going through this course. And part of it was wines of all over the world, elements of making sweet wine in Hungary, or developing the Posito method in Italy, or looking at Austria and how the Veltliner, the Gunther Veltliner, is such a prominent grape. All of this real wine anorak nerd stuff that I find genuinely interesting. And it also makes it a little easier when I'm next traveling and I don't see a familiar face from South Africa on the wine list, but I do see wine from another part of the world. I might not know the wine itself, but I do have a better feel for where it's from, and as a result, what it might be, and whether or not I should look at it as the wine to accompany my meal or to have at the wine bar that I have found myself in. So that was one part of the education. But the other part was a very fundamental part that I think a lot of us tend to gloss over. We know that grapes come from soil, and we know that they end up in a bottle and taste rather nice once the winemakers have cast their magic upon them. But what happens in between? And of course, I'm generalizing. There'll be many of you watching and listening who have a fairly good idea of the wine process. But in the sort of detail that really gets you to understand, first of all, just how much work actually goes into wine, and then how good our winemakers must be, well, I felt that was cause to do something special on the show. And so today it is a talk through that process. And the timing is good because we're growing season coming out of winter. Spring is almost upon us. And that means it is the long, initially gentle, and then quite frenetic road into the harvest and the production of the wine that we all delight in. And my academic guide on this process for today is someone whose wine I've enjoyed for a long time now, and she has plenty of acclaim, including not that long ago when Tim Atkin proclaimed her the South African Young Winemaker of the Year, a title she'd still be up for. And so she is going to take me through, from the perspective of Momento wines, just how they produce and develop and grow and turn grapes in a field into bottles of wonder just a few months later. So that's our show today, talking you through the wine process. I'm really looking forward to it. And we'll kick it off in a second, just as soon as we're done with some wine news. Well, this is Liam Tomlin's brand new spot. It has just opened up. New look, new feel, still incredible food, and still a really important part of the Liam Tomlin offering. Some really, really good wine. The wine lists at Liam Tomlin's restaurants have always been, for me, one of the highlights. They need to match some excellent food, and Liam's Kitchen delivers consistently. He's been a feature in different parts of the Cape, Chef's Warehouse and Canteen, now on Bree Street. A lovely feel. I know one or two people have already had a quick look. The reports initially are glowing, but go and check out for yourself. Enjoy Liam's food, but also have a look at that wine list. There is always something different, something new, something to delight. And often your only real challenge is trying to narrow it down and decide what to order, which generally means, well, the moment you're done, make another booking and head back soon. Chef's Warehouse and Canteen, Bree Street, Liam Tomlin, open for business. Cape Wine Auction is good to go. It is the 2025 edition. It's on the 1st of February. It's at Laborie Estate, just as you come into Paarl, right on the edge of the city centre of downtown Paarl. It's a superb venue. There's a lot of history to it. some really good wine, and there'll be even more good wine on the day because the format has changed ever so slightly. There'll be a lunch, wine tasting, kicks off late morning into the early afternoon with the barrel auction and then the lifestyle lot auction. And that combination is not only particularly inviting, but also the basis on which so many great causes in the Cape are supported through the Cape Wine Auction Trust. If you'd like to come along, you have me as your host and auctioneer for the day. I hope to see you there. Tickets available at the Cape Wine Auction website. And then Tim Atkin, this is just a couple of weeks away, the release of his South Africa report, 10 o'clock, Tuesday morning, 3 September, which means the night of Monday, 2 September, lots of nervous winemakers wondering what Tim Atkin has said. I've heard rumors there might be a 100-point wine. I've got no idea from who. We are hoping to have Tim on the show just after this happens. As soon as I have confirmation, I'll let you know. But Tim Atkin, with his report, I think the tastings are all sold out already. It's a really popular chronicle of a year in South African wine from somebody who not only understands South African wine so well, but has a very clear love for and admiration of our wines and also, most importantly, our winemakers. So in the diary, the special report from Tim Atkin, 10 o'clock, Tuesday morning, the 3rd of September, that will be out and ready to go. Right, well, let's jump into today's show. My guest is Marelise Niemann. First, caught my attention making some wine at Beaumont and doing a terrific job. She hasn't moved terribly far, but the fear is still the wine home. Momento wines are now the brand with which she dazzles us on a regular basis. Marelise, lovely to have you on the show. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's always a treat having you with us. And in your professorial role, as you will be today, giving us a guide through wine. But very quickly, give us an update on Momento wines. What's been happening since we last spoke, and what is the state of play with one of my favorite brands?
Good morning. Always lovely to see you and to chat wine and vineyards with you and your guests. It's been a great year at Momento, and we have actually finally taken the step, and we are releasing 3 brand new single vineyard Grenaches in September. So I've always wanted to do that, and now I think I'm old enough, now that I've turned 40, to take the bull by the horns, and we are releasing these wines the last week of September. So keep an eye out for that. And on the farm side, we are busy. We have just finished pruning everything. So it's been a very, very busy winter season because it's been wet. So a lot of rainy days. So we had to prune fast and prune accurately. But it's been a fantastic winter season for us. More rain is coming. So it's really been very good for the vineyards.
I'm very excited about that single vineyard Grenache. I remember you chatting to me about it before, and you mentioning somewhere called Priorat, and I smiled and nodded, and I had no idea where you were talking about. And then earlier this year in Madrid, I got to share some wine with one of the Priorat producers, and had a long discussion about Grenache and Carmenere, and your name came up, Ibn Sadi's name came up, people who've spent time in the Priorat area, that tiny area sort of west of Barcelona that makes fairly high priced because of the conditions, but glorious wine and the inspiration taken there in the wines of Momento. So put me on that order list. You also mentioned the pruning, and that kicks us off rather nicely in terms of our tale today. We're head into spring. The pruning process, this is very much an introductory show to people who don't really have a feel for how all of this works. How do we make wine? How do we produce it? How does it go from vineyard through to cellar? So let's start with that vineyard process. The pruning, what you're doing now, looking after the vines. How does the winemaker work in that space? And why is this so important to what ends up in our bottle?
So, I mean, I think a lot of people think wine gets made in the cellar, which is the absolute opposite if you want to make really great wines. I mean, if we look at wines, really, really iconic and fantastic wines, they were all made in the vineyards. And I think we hear this line of wine is actually being made in the vineyard, but nobody really understands that it takes 10 months of the year or more than 10 months of the year to pick grapes during 2 months of the year. So the build up from the day that you've picked the grapes from the vineyards until you pick them again, that whole 10 to 11 months is actually what your wine is going to be like, and how good it's going to be, what character it's going to have, and how much personality it's going to have. So my thing's always been, and I think many other fantastic wines have the same philosophy, that we when the grapes arrive, they should already have been made already. So we just guide them through the cellar, and we get the fermentation going, and eventually we choose barrels or maturing vessels. But the actual wine gets made from the day that you pick. After you've picked, you start working in the vineyards until the day you pick again. So just a very sort of a rough idea of how the season from picking to picking again works is: you pick your grapes. After that, you start feeding your vineyard immediately. To It's like when you've just ran a marathon, you need to sort of give your body back all the elements and the salts and the moisture that it needs. So that's basically what you do to your vineyard when it's just given you all that it could, and produce the best grapes that you possibly wanted from those vineyards. You feed your vineyard, you make sure it's happy, it's got its elements back, all its food back, all its hydration back, and then the vineyard will go into rest as soon as it gets cold. So in South Africa, obviously we are in the southern hemisphere. So for northern and southern hemispheres, we are exact opposite timeline. So for us, we pick January, February, March. Then the vineyard goes to rest if as soon as the winter cold hits. April, May, June, hopefully it's cold, so that the vineyard goes to complete rest. Once it's resting completely, that will be June, July, August, which is now. You prune your vineyards, and you can decide when you prune your vineyards. For every varietal, it's different. We try and prune as late as possible, and when it's pruned, it's resting. Now it will be August, and in September, when spring starts, the vines will start budding. So as soon as as it starts warming up again, the vine wakes up. During its sleeping phase, you need lots of rain. And if you don't get the rain when the vine is sleeping, it's going to be a very stressful picking and growing season for the vineyard. So we love winter rain, and a lot of winter rain in South Africa. We're a dry country, or a dry Cape area, so we need as much rain as we can for the vineyards without obviously washing them away. So at this stage, vineyards are resting. We've pruned them. They need to sort of reserve the energy and build energy from the soil. So what we're doing in the soils, we are putting back organic matter, we're putting back carbon, nitrogen. This all happens while the vineyard is resting. So we've planted cover crop. So for each of our vineyards, it depends on what the specific vineyard needs. Some of our vineyards need more nitrogen, which gives it the energy to grow a lot of green matter, so a lot of leaves. Other vineyards have a lot of leaves already during growing season, so we put a lot of carbon back in the soil. Carbon we get from organic matter like mulch, which is dried. You can either use straw or hay. We use our alien trees that grow all around the farm, and we shred it with a machine, and then we let it dry out for a season or two before we put it back into the soil. So during the winter season now is when you put back into the soil. So we put nitrogen back with our cover crop. The cover crop is the plants that you grow in between the vineyard rows. So that can be anything from lupins to beans. I mean, it depends on what your preferences are for your specific vineyards. These cover crops grow in between the vines, beautiful green cover crops. That will be your nitrogen that goes back into the soil when it becomes summer again. So these cover crops will eventually dry out, and we choose to roll them down. So they'll roll down as brown cover crop organic matter, and they will go back into the soil. So that will put the carbon back, the nutrients back, the nitrogen back, and then that will give the energy to the vineyard then to start the growing season, which is springtime, which will be next month in September, October. The vineyards will start budding, and then the whole process of growing starts again.
You're not just a winemaker, you're a farmer as well. And there's clearly so much to be done. And as you make very clear, if you don't have the right grapes coming into your vineyard, you can only work with what is left. And that will determine the ability to create the great wine that you do. Taking that step, though, out of the vineyards and into the cellar is a really important one. And for me, this is probably, of all the things that would give me heart failure as a winemaker, the one that would tip me over the edge the most. And that's trying to work out exactly when to pick, because pick too early and maybe the grapes aren't ripe enough and you don't have enough sugar to them and you lose some volume to the wine and you don't get the alcohol levels you want. Pick too late and you've gone too far and you've lost your acidity and you don't have the balance that you wanted. And then there's also, okay, let me hang on, but 2 days later the rain comes down, or there's so much to work out. I know it's not an absolutely exact science, and I'd imagine there's a certain degree of instinct to it as well. How does Marelise, the winemaker, make these decisions, and how nerve-wracking is it for you, even though it's something you've done so many times?
I don't know if you've ever been in the cellar during harvest time, but it's not the best time to visit any winemaker. We spend 10 months of the year getting everything as beautiful as possible in the vineyards, and we have one picking date. So you choose one picking day for your whole vineyard, or you can split it up. But if you get it wrong, you basically you don't mess up the whole vintage, but you can make either a very good wine, a great wine, or a very bad wine just by picking the grapes at the right or the wrong time. So I work very closely with all the vineyards. For each winemaker, it's different. I prefer to follow my vineyards very carefully during the growing season so that I know what they feel like when it's time to pick. You can't just walk into a vineyard when it's almost ripe and then expect to know how it feels and how much heat and sun and stress it can handle. So the build up, the growing season from September, October towards February is a crucial time for you to be with the vineyards, to work with them so that you know how much stress they can take during the week of picking. So with some of my vineyards I've worked with since 2013, and each vineyard is like a personality. It's like a child, basically. You know how much it can take, you know how much heat it can take. And some of my vineyards, for example, which is grown on a shallow soil, more clay rich, which dries out quite quickly during the season, you don't let your grapes hang for too long, because the vineyard will stress. When a vineyard stresses too much, the acid of the grape drops, because what the vineyard is actually trying to do is it wants to throw the grapes off so that the seeds can go into the soil. But obviously we have interrupted the cycle, so we want to take the grapes and make wine. So the vineyard is always thinking of ripening grapes, throwing it on the ground and wanting to have more plants. But we have now interfered, so we are taking the grapes before they drop. But what we want as winemakers are grapes that have good acid, so good freshness, low pHs. Low pHs means healthy juice. It means healthy wines. It means wines that can mature for long. So you know your vineyard, and you know when that vineyard starts to stress too much. So that's why for each vineyard is different. Vineyards on deeper soils that have more organic matter, that are richer, has a slower ripening phase. So that vineyard you can handle with less urgency. But some of the older dryland farm vineyards that I work with, when they're tired, they are tired. So when you have to pick, when they start stressing, you pick the grapes immediately. You don't let the grapes hang for longer. You look at weather conditions, you look at rain, you look at wind, and then obviously you have the logistical cellar space. So it's a absolute crazy time during harvest, because all these decisions need to be absolutely spot on. Because if you drop one ball, usually you start dropping all the balls in the cellar. Stressful, but great fun. I mean, what else would we be doing in February, March in South Africa?
It's almost an adrenaline sport, this. And if you've been, as Marelise says, into a cellar, you kind of want to go in riot protection gear just in case you catch a boisterous winemaker at the wrong moment. Not just bringing all these grapes in and you've now got to deal with, right, have I got the date right? But then all of these processes, and I don't want to get too technical and start delving into carbonic and semi-carbonic, and are we going whole bunch, and all of these different details. More give me a sense, Marelise, as a winemaker, just how crucial it is once these grapes have come in to get the next few days right, to make those immediate decisions on for a particular varietal, how we're going to address it, and also, have you planned this 3 months early? Have you said, right, I know I've got my Grenache, I'm going semi-carbonic maceration, and that is what I'm going to do? Or is there a little bit of living on the fly and, oh, hang on, I've seen these grapes, they're not quite what I was expecting. Right, let's change, let's do something different. How flexible does that space need to be?
So if we go back a little bit towards, let's say, from the growing season, so springtime, when it starts to bud, then it starts to grow little shoots. There you have to be very, very careful that you don't have too many shoots growing. So we use a thing called suckering, where we take unwanted shoots from the vineyard so that all the energy goes into the shoots that you want to grow. So if your vineyard has too many shoots, all the energy gets spread out into all the shoots. What we want is one or two shoots that grow, that takes all the energy from the soil. Then later on, you start forming your little bunches. You have flowering, you have berry set, and then it's veraison when they start turning color. Already during veraison, if you haven't made critical decisions for your vineyard, you will lose quality and you will lose wine quality and grape quality. So just to go back to show you, to just explain how crucial it is from growing, from the start of the budding to veraison, meaning changing of color. That is the most important time in a short space if you want to make any decisions for your specific vineyard. Some of our vineyards grow on poor soils, so they stress quite a lot. So during that stages, we will take, once the berries have set, we will start taking some of the bunches off if we see the vineyard stressing too much. Fast forward another month, after veraison, after about a month roughly, we start picking these grapes. That usually in our area, we are in Bot River, and I pick a lot of grapes from the Paardeberg and all over the Western Cape, but usually it's hot and dry. Very rarely do we have rain in our area. So it's hot, it's dry, vineyards are stressing, winemakers are stressing, and you need to slow down sometimes and just think what the vineyard needs in that specific time. So what I usually do is the build up, the 2 week build up towards the picking date is also very important to see how these vineyards handle the sun and the heat. If it ripens slowly and the sugar builds up slowly, you have a happy vineyard at that stage. Once the water in the soil, because we don't irrigate the vineyards, we are completely reliant on what nature gives us. So if the soil is dry at that stage, during that build up to picking, it's better for me to pick the grapes earlier. When I pick the grapes slightly earlier, I'm not talking about a low alcohol wine or something dramatic. It's literally just a little bit earlier, a week or 7 days, or let's say 5 to 7 days earlier than I should have picked or picked in previous years. That preserves the freshness in the grape. So that's, again, pH, acid, fresh flavors, more pinker, redder flavors instead of darker, blacker flavors. Once you move over that spectrum where the pH starts rising and the acid starts dropping, then you have less freshness and energy in your juice. When you have less energy in your juice, you'll sit with that lower energy level throughout the wine. Lower energy level for me is like flabbiness in wine, higher pH, less fresh flavor, less crunchy fruit. So you ask if I change every now and again. Every year is a new year when we make wine. So every year for me is is a new winemaking year. For example, let's take a year where ripening was slow and all the bunches and the stems ripened properly. So where they actually, I mean, sometimes we literally take the stems and we bite on them to feel the tannin. If those tannins are very green, we would not use as much whole bunches in that specific vineyard or in that tank. When the bunches, when you bite them and they are sort of, they're obviously very tannic, but when they are more riper in tannin, then I would use more whole bunches. So every season for every vineyard is handled completely separately. The Bot River grapes ripen differently. The Bot River area has different rain on different stages during the season than the Paardeberg or Swartland or Stellenbosch or Pekingese cliff grapes that I work with. So every vineyard is like a little child on its own. You can't treat everybody the same. So you can't treat vineyards or picking dates or winemaking techniques the same for every vineyard every year.
You also, I'd imagine, can't treat the process the same every year in terms of what you do thereafter. Now, again, there's this vision, right? Well, it's quite busy during the harvest season, but once you've got those 4 to 6 weeks done, winemakers just spend the rest of the year going on surfing holidays and occasionally coming up to Johannesburg to have lavish lunches. And then spending weeks going to far off wine fairs in Belgium and Bolivia and corners of Winnipeg and showcasing their wines to the world. It looks incredibly glamorous and generally not too much work, which of course is not the case at all. As you've made these decisions, your wine is now in a tank, it's in a barrel, you've decided to pop it into a concrete egg, into a foudre. How much of your time is spent keeping an eye on what's there, remembering what's there, and making the decisions of, right, this one's done. We've had it. It can bottle, it can blend, it's ready to go.
So that's usually where I try and sort of take a step back. After you've made the wine, I think the wine needs time to just rest a little bit. So resting meaning it's going through mallow. So you've pressed the wines, it's dry, it's fermented, and it's now going through malolactic. During malolactic, there's a lot of CO2 in the wine. You can't really get the different flavors that well. So I prefer to leave it until it's completely through malolactic. Sometimes it can take a month, sometimes it can take 3 to 4 months. So I choose to not judge the wine too much after I've just made it. If there's something wrong or something is not going in the right direction, then I'll interfere or I'll intervene. I'll help the wine, I'll heat it up or I'll cool it down. But usually after the winemaking, after the February, March harvest season and fermentation, I try to take a step back and leave the wine to just settle down. And then I taste. So I would taste from, let's say, April, May, I would intensively taste and see where the wines are going and which portions are performing better than others. And on that tasting, I'll make further decisions of what to blend, if I need to blend it early or if I need to keep certain wines separate to blend it later.
You also have to think back to wines from a previous vintage or two, depending on how long you're keeping stuff, how long your wine is waiting in barrel or waiting to be blended from a purely administrative point of view. And this is from somebody who, as everybody in my team will tell you, normally has 100 different things juggling in the air and trying to remember what goes where and when. How on earth do you remember? Oh, hang on. I've got some of that Grenache from 2 years ago, and I think next month should be perfect for me to try it. But I've also got 17 other different wines at different stages. How difficult is it to keep a handle on all of that? And is there a secret method that you use at Momento to make sure that somehow you're able to know what's going on where?
I think most importantly is record keeping. Like I've got spreadsheets of what happened with which wines and why I put it away. And those record keeping and tasting them on a regular basis to sort of keep track of where they're going is very important. I hate to lose wine. So I always try and work wine in a way, whether if whether it's a sort of a private bottling of wines that sort of didn't give me what I wanted. But a spreadsheet, for me, spreadsheets, I don't have a great memory, so I have to write it all down, and I have to keep track of how the wines are developing over time. So spreadsheets, notes. My barrels are completely full of notes, dates. Uh, I taste with many different people, so it's a whole. Every barrel has a story around it, and those little notes guide me to what eventually will be the decision for the wines on blending day.
And then I guess the final part of this process before you have to take off your winemaker hat, which has replaced your farmer hat, and put on your sales hat, is to decide when to say goodbye, when to decide they've grown up enough, they're good to brave the big wide world all on their own, and send them out there. Is that just a process of tasting coupled with the experience of the particular wines?
Yeah, I think that's also, it's a question of when do you think your wines are ready for people to understand them? Because I think as winemakers, we understand our wines from day one because we work with the vineyards. But I think it's important to know when people that drink your wine will understand your wine and will feel like they're having an experience with the wine. So I prefer, it's always been the case, to keep my wines for longer in bottle or not in barrel. So I bottle early, but once they're in bottle, I prefer to keep them rather for longer in bottle because I feel they open up over time. So for me, it's rather adding another 3 to 6 months to a wine in bottle and releasing it later so that people can connect to the wine. Young wines, okay, just to go a step back, I don't do any additions like fining agents or mouthfeel products to my wines. They are grapes made in the cellar with sulfur. If needed, I add some acid. Most years I don't. I don't, on top of that, go and add fining agents and proteins and stuff to make the wine ready for people to drink. So my philosophy is when a wine needs time, then you need to hold it back before you release it. So a lot of my releases are done not always on the same time, but when it's ready. A lot of my white wines I only release in October, for example, which is quite late, I think, for white wines. So I prefer to just wait until the wine is ready, and that's tasting. Some vintages are tighter, some vintages are more open, depending on the weather conditions, depending on how ripe you picked. So for me, it's about tasting the wines and knowing when to show it to people that's going to drink it, because not everybody works in a cellar that can taste wines that go through malolactic. Wine that goes through malolactic is a horrible thing. So if you don't understand it, then I prefer to rather not show it to you. So that's also wine, young wines in bottle. I prefer to show the wines when they are ready to sort of meet the world, like children. You don't push them out into the world when they're too young. You wait until they're ready, and then you introduce them to the rest of the world.
No, we're currently in school holidays, and I'm trying to push my 8 and 10-year-old out into the world and get a job and leave home. But there are certain legal requirements to keep them in the house just a little longer. When the wine does arrive and we get to taste it, we drink it, and we enjoy it, especially because it is your wine. Those who know the wine, are familiar with it, will raise a glass. Oh, there's another brilliant example of Marelise Niemann. But I think just as blending wine is so important, so that the blend of the team is something that is so crucial. Through this whole process, there's a lot that you are doing yourself. There's a lot that you're overlooking. But wherever you are, from start to finish in this whole 12-month cycle of producing wine, there are so many other people who I'd imagine you don't just have to get on with and work with, but also trust to be able to say, right, I'm going off to visit the Hong Kong Wine Fair next week. These are the wines you need to keep an eye on. And if necessary, this is what you do. When it's a brand that's so personal to you, when it is your name, when it is your wine, how difficult is it to hand over that authority to somebody else?
Well, it's very difficult, but I've got a very small team at the moment. So it's people that I know very well. It's people that I've worked with for years. It's a tiny team, and everybody knows exactly how we work with grapes and how much respect we have for wines and how much respect we have for each other. So my key thing in the cellar is a small team. So everybody knows what their responsibility is. I can't manage 100 people. So for me, it's better to have a small team. We all work very hard. We all have the same mindset, the same philosophy about wine. We all have huge respect for the soil, for nature, for the vineyards, and for how we work with these delicate grapes and wines. And communication, always sitting and just chatting about wine, enjoying wines, and then just working together as a group. But small team, and just we all have to be on the same page all the time. Like we talk about things, we all work hard, together, so it becomes like a family. And I believe in sort of having long-term relationship with the people that I work with in our team, because it's not, you can't make, a single person cannot make a wine. You need all the different parts in a whole winemaking group. So we've got someone that's really good on the floor, that is absolutely particular about 1 milliliter and 10 milliliters. I'm a more like a natural taste and blend and then decide later. But this person always helps me to first have it on paper, then decide what you want and see if the two matches. So it's a group that works together, and it's like a whole body. Like there's a head, there's limbs, there's a body, and yeah, very close. And we drink a lot of wine together, and that keeps us all like very close and all on the same page.
It's a fantastic operation. It is one that plays out on these micro scales right across the winelands, and not just the winelands of South Africa, the winelands of the world. Every year at either the start of the year in the Southern Hemisphere, or towards the August, September, October period if you're in the North. And if, like I was until very recently, you weren't too familiar with the detail of what goes in, then I hope this has been a bit of an eye-opener, a bit of an introduction to just what goes in to turning that field vines into the bottles of wine that we are so lucky to sample. Speaking of those, just before we let you go, Marelise, a reminder, the brand new wines, when are they coming out? When can we expect to revel in them?
So they'll be available. So I'm releasing them end of September. So they'll be available from the 1st of October. And unfortunately, they are, as always, tiny batch wines. So I will release not even 1,000 bottles of each of the single vineyards, but it's an introduction to the different soil types of these new Grenaches. And as you know, I am a massive Grenache lover and supporter, and I can't see my life without Grenache. So this is sort of a window into the different soil types of South Africa, where we can see what Grenache does on different soil types. So we will have a sandstone, we will have a shale, we will have granite, we will have schist, and all of them will be bottled separately so that we can see the different personalities that Grenache will can give us in South Africa. So it's available first week of October and limited. So it's more for us to see what it can do. Next year there'll be more. So yeah, I hope you get your hands on some. If not, get on my mailing list. There's always a couple of bottles extra in my home to share.
As the world of Priorat comes to Bot River, it's another exciting year for the Momento brand and for Marelise. Marelise, thank you. You've been a wonderful teacher. I have listened patiently, and there are many teachers I've had over the years who would argue that has not always been my strength. So thank you for imparting so much knowledge with us today, and doing so in the context of your own Momento wine world. Good luck with the new releases. I shall be in the queue. I have booked a B&B in Botrefeer for a week earlier, and then 2 nights before I'm coming to sleep outside the door of the cellar to make sure I'm front of the queue to get that wine. And I can't wait to try it. Marelise, thank you so much. Good luck with the run-in. Happy winemaking, happy wine producing, and thank you for such a cool and insightful run through the winemaking process.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope I could teach some of your listeners and viewers about what happens in the cellar and in the winery and in the vineyard throughout the year. Thanks for having me, and all the best.
There we go. Professor Marelise Niemann from the Momento Wine Institute, giving us start to finish, how it begins in the field, how it ends in the cellar, and out of the bottle and on to the world. A lot I learned there. There might be some terms there that perhaps you weren't overly familiar with. Veraison, semi-carbonic maceration, things that slip into the wine vocabulary very easily amongst those who know, but with not quite so much understanding for those who don't. Well, don't be afraid next time you're on a wine farm, you're at a wine dinner, at a wine event with people who know a bit about wine. Ask about these terms, and not just the dictionary meaning, but what they mean, how they influence wine, how they play out. And I say this again from having done WSET3 recently, that knowledge empowers you with so much ability to better understand and appreciate the wine that you're drinking and raise that whole wine experience as a whole. That does it for today. Big thank you to Marelise Niemann from Momento Wines. We will see you back again with the magazine show on Thursday, and then back next week when we are celebrating Cup Classique with a great collection. Look out for Kulu Fine Wines, for Peter Ferreira Wines with Anne Ferreira, not Peter, Dainty Bess, and Genevieve just up the road from Marelise. That's on next week's show. For now, hope you enjoyed your study and appreciate you supporting the show. It's Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. Goodbye.